Everyone's first questions aren't about the tech or the opportunity. I'd say fear and uncertainty. I would say there's been almost an erosion of inherent trust, which I think is good for the industry where people just took it, not realizing the risks. I think now people do a lot more due diligence. People all have the same questions of how am I going to get more fans, more engaged fans, reach out to new demographics. I think a lot of brands are very interested in crypto predominantly because it skews young. And a lot of brands see themselves, especially in sports, and their future and their financial future. They get interested in all those things.
Hello and welcome, everybody, and welcome back to So Tell Us About Yourself, which is a Tangem podcast over here at the Tangem team. Let me just tell you a little bit about Tangem. Tangem is on a mission to create crypto products that are safe, easy, standable, and truly self-sovereign. We create products in the shape of a ring or a card. These are actually cold crypto wallets. They're very simple, very easy to set up. Anybody can do it, regardless of whether you are a newbie or you've been a seasoned veteran for a long time. So today we're going to be talking to a project that has the same spirit of empowerment, which is the Chiliz blockchain. They specialize in transforming fan engagements across sports, entertainment, beyond. Chiliz isn't just doing the same old project that people are kind of used to. Chiliz is really built upon new ways of doing blockchain tech, and Max here from the Chiliz team is going to explain everything to you from the very beginning and go from there. Max, welcome to the show. Let's kick things off with a short, quick intro.
Yeah, sure. Nice to meet you, by the way. Thanks for having me on. As you said, my name is Max Rabinovitch. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at Chiliz. I've been with the project and the company since its inception. Actually, since before its inception, Alex, the founder and CEO, and I had worked together since early 2014. Things completely unrelated to sports and crypto, well, related in our minds, but unrelated, I think, to any normal and sane person. And as far as Chili's goes, we began that journey in late 2017 from the idea stage, wrote the white paper, and early 2018, January, February 2018, and we published it, and we went out for a private placement round on Chili's as a token right afterwards, and have been kind of riding the wave of not dying as a small business and growing and evolving ever since, all the way up until, today, where in 2020, 21, we launched our first proof of concept product, Socios, on top of Chiliz, which was back then a completely private chain. It was just a fork of Ethereum, and essentially the tech that we were using to build Socios and launch fan tokens as a scalable proof of concept for kind of retail utility focused products and a way to connect crypto and sports. And back then we had an initial tranche of 5 partners who I think candidly assumed, these guys are going to give it their best go and then disappear within 6 to 12 months, like the majority of projects, period, not just in crypto. But we were lucky enough to gain some virality and prove that our business model worked as opposed to just disappearing. So we've been building both Chili's and Socios ever since, ups and downs, obviously, up until today, where we obviously, at this point, a few years ago, we launched the open permissionless version of our chain, and we're up to over 70 sports partners that we've tokenized and we work with day in, day out.
So that's over 70 partners, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Hey. Yeah, I've seen you guys definitely at all the conferences. I think I caught up with you guys over at Paris Blockchain Week, and you've really grown in the last couple of years, of course. But it's really nice to see. It's one of the most busiest booths that I've ever seen. It was completely overpacked with people, and it was a lot of questions. So I get what you mean in terms of that proof of concept from the first idea to kind of moving into the reality. And so many businesses in between kind of fall through and kind of change their concepts. But it's nice to see that Chili's kind of stuck to their initial idea of here's what we started with and here's what we ended up with being the entirety of the image. So I'm sure that you, Max, had everything to do with that. Let's dive into my kind of the questions that I have a little bit in mind. We've done a little bit of prep ahead of time, and so for me and with the Tangem community and generally just anybody listening to this, we always want to uncover, the basics of like, okay, so what's the mission, what's the story, but then also diving into the details of, so how does the tech work, how does the blockchain fundamentals actually, what does it do in terms of the utility of the token and the product itself, and just going into all of those wonderful things. So I have
For sure.
some questions ahead of time. So let's start with some of them. What inspired Chiliz to combine crypto with sports fandom? Those two things generally were very different segments of the market. But with Chiliz, you've combined them into a really smooth product. So what inspired that to happen?
It's a good question, and I hope it's not too rambly of an answer. I, unlike what you just said, actually didn't really review the questions. So if I seem to be thinking in real time and pausing, that's probably why. I think mostly it came about as a function of where I think both Alex and I come from. We're not inherently crypto people. We come from the iGaming, but I would say more specifically the poker world, which is always been very, very close and overlapping with crypto, even back to the, old in 2010, 11, 12 Bitcoin days. So we always had it as a concept in our minds. We never paid it much heed, but what we were always interested in doing back then was we termed it sportifying poker. We always had the idea that poker was a mind sport. Had tried with a number of different companies to essentially create user-based sports products. Just with it happened to be with poker. We were the first people to put team-based poker league on Twitch. We're actually the first people to put gaming content, as in like real money gaming content, technically on Twitch. And we were always trying to figure out, well, how can we connect this idea of essentially broadcasting this game as a sport with new tech for years before we ever started with Chili's. The idea of creating a platform and just having retail users interact with it is where we wanted to go. It's what we knew. We definitely aren't, like DeFi finance guys in that sense. Basically, during Bitcoin's first essentially mainstream cycle, in 2017, when it ran up to close to $20,000 per token, and it really got the world's attention for the first time. I think, like a lot of other builders and entrepreneurs, kind of took notice. And back then, the idea of blockchain was much more, I think, I don't want to say naive, but maybe more nebulous and more all encompassing. I would liken it a bit to how in 2023, everyone started thinking about AI and that nobody really, at least, in the, let's say, layman universe kind of knew exactly what LLMs or AI were, but there was just this sense of like, oh, this is a thing you should look at and you can connect it to everything. How you should be connecting it to everything. Less so than it is now. And I think in 2017, people started thinking the same way about blockchain as a technology, where they were just all, looking under the pillows, as it were, thinking, okay, well, like what application does this have for our thing or this other thing? Like how can we possibly use this and leverage this? And we'd always had a feeling like we love poker, but there was kind of a bit of an industry ceiling because it's such a niche game. And we always thought of it as a sport. So we started thinking, well, what can we do in normal sports? What can we do? Actually, back then we were thinking specifically about esports. And we just kind of, I think we actually even left on separate winter trips with just a thought experiment of like, okay, let's think about how can we, if we can connect sports and blockchain tech in a way that isn't dumb, or gimmicky or doesn't make sense. Like how would that look? What would you build? On the other side of that, we come meet back up in Malta in January of 2018, and I kind of laid out this simple idea. Just honestly, this was right when even the concept of the DAO was first starting to get rolled. I think at that point there was the first one. It was 6, 7 months old in terms of people really understanding the concept of a permissionless governance system. Just pitched this idea of like, well, what if sports organizations had a token and there was a DAO for, an official DAO for that organization, but instead of it being completely decentralized, ironically, it was antithetical to what a DAO should be. What if it was centralized, right? What if essentially the team was controlling this DAO and it worked as an automated voting mechanism? Anyone who bought the token was allowed to vote on team decisions. And back then, like we were, I think, very naive and we thought, well, wouldn't it be cool, like if people could buy these tokens and subsidize teams enough revenue wise that they would let them vote on player transfer decisions and like who the, general manager would be and like things that I think realistically fans really, really want to obviously control in the teams that they love. And that was kind of the idea that I pitched almost as like a, I don't want to say drunken, but like a very simplistic kind of like, teenager's idea of what a business would look like. And said, hey, does that make sense? Is that a gimmick in crypto or does it have real legs? Could it scale? And I think we were both intrigued enough where after that we took some actual time to learn about the industry on at least that, high level technical level and start getting into the weeds of everything and then kind of sketched it out as a real product. And that led, to kind of this snowballing vision of, okay, what if we had our own blockchain tech stack below it? What if we built everything on a private ledger that we forked ourselves so we wouldn't have to worry about gas because I think we're going to have to sell millions of these tokens. And after I would say a month, 6 weeks, we kind of had this fully formed, vertically integrated idea that I transformed into, we call it a white paper. I'd say it's more like a kind of a business vision paper. It has some technical outlines, but it was mostly focused on just explaining what the vision of being, hey, we're going to create this chain. We're going to fork Ethereum. We're going to build a centralized wallet and fan engagement essentially platform on top of it that would house assets that we minted on the side chain. They would be the fan tokens. And then we'd go sell these tokens to fans. And they'd finally, whether a fan was 10,000 miles away from where the team they love played or where they were next door, they all kind of have this equal democratized access to be recognized and influence their team. Because we figured that's pretty cool. It seems to make sense. It has some intrinsic value to it because you're already working directly with an established IP. And at the same time, we thought, hey, this is probably solving a pretty direct business need for a lot of these organizations because a lot of teams love to say, we have millions of fans in X, Y, and Z countries. But when you actually dig under the surface, even for a few minutes, you realize, well, they don't actually monetize those fans. There's no way to, other than, getting more Twitter or whatever X followers, they're not actually leveraging it in a proper way to either make more money to continue to expand the team or to actually grow the brand. I mean, to simplify the story, decided, okay, let's go see if anyone wants to buy the Chiliz token via private placement so we can get some funding to pursue the idea. And when that was a success, we very quickly went to a bunch of esports teams to kind of pitch them this newfangled plan that we had. Because back then, ironically, in our minds, we had come from poker and games. So we didn't really know too much about, football, especially European football or other sports. And we kind of had this understanding that that would be the last, if this ever got off the ground really, really well, then at some point, maybe in the abstract future, we'd be able to work with big sports teams. And we thought esports teams, they have younger audiences. They're already used to digital economies. This is going to be kind of a home run. And it didn't quite work out that way. But we learned the hard way that esports is it's very volatile and it's like segmented industry where it proved to be much harder to work with those teams in ways that were sustainable for us. And almost on a lark, because Alex had the connections, we went and pitched Juventus and PSG, and we thought we'd get laughed out of the room. But they said, okay, this is pretty cool. You're right. It might be interesting if we were able to reach these new fans. If we partner and you guys pay us some money, you can try, right? You're probably going to fail and that's going to be okay. We'll get over it and that'll be that. So we very quickly found ourselves, a few launch partners and we were able to launch tokens on their behalf and luckily worked hard enough, I think, where the system actually worked, right? We hustled enough to make sure the votes got out and we did the right activations and we took care of the first few initial users that bought tokens. So they really did feel like they didn't just buy a token that had, vaporware or an idea behind it. They bought a token and it instantly on day one connected into a working product. And that's where the idea kind of came from. And we, as I said, kind of in my intro, we've pivoted a lot since then, both in our ethos and what we think it makes fan tokens great and Chiliz is a protocol, but that's where it kind of all came from initially.
Oh, I love that. You've definitely touched upon some of the questions I was already anticipating to ask, though, in terms of like the early vision. Where did you begin with? How did you end
Sure.
up here? So it's nice to hear like a full story of like what the pitch was in a way. I guess a natural question is, well, you went to all of these the big players immediately to Juventus and so on, right? And you had this pitch in mind. What was it? What was the 30-second pitch? If you had to explain it, what does Chili's do? What is it from start to finish?
That's a good question because definitely wasn't a 30-second pitch because this was,
To make it like as a
yeah,
short.
we started talking to a lot of these organizations, keep in mind, in 2018. So when we came in talking about tokens and the idea of a DAO or even a centralized on-chain platform. I mean, sorry to swear, like no one knew what we were fucking talking about. So the pitch didn't start with, how it would start today, where here's our tech, here's what we're gonna do, here's the theme, here's the mechanics, and here's how you're gonna make money. It started with like a 5 minute tutorial on like, this is what blockchain is. It's not a scam. It's real. Have you heard about Bitcoin? No. Okay. Here it's just, money on the internet. So I would say it was honestly, those first few pitches were very, very janky in that it ended up, the first hour or two of the meeting was more so being, trying to make sure that your counterparties across the table were on the same wavelength as you before you then transitioned into like, well, anyway, so here's how we're going to adapt this technology to work with you guys. But and after, I mean, after that, you could do a 30-second pitch, which was basically what you say you have, 400, 500, 600 million fans. What if all of them gave you $1 and in return you let them have an influence on the team, right? Because that seems like that would make a lot of money for the teams. Teams always, it's a very expensive business to run. They need money to buy new players. They need money to refurbish stadiums and they constantly want to enter new markets to make sure. I mean, kind of the end goal, I think, of any sports team in any league is kind of we want to be the biggest sports team in the world, right? We want to be ubiquitous, both in success and both in brand loyalty and all that stuff. And that pitch seemed to make sense to them. We very quickly found out that like all of our misguided ideas of how much influence they would be willing to give fans weren't as extreme to be tactful as we thought they would be, but we did find especially at the beginning, a few core, at least aesthetic, non-game breaking influence ideas that people did seem to care about. And we kind of took it from there. And I would say over the years, as both we and kind of the concept of what we were doing as Chili's and as Socios got more established, especially in the sports business world, it became easier and easier. We did have to explain to a lot of people in 2021 that we weren't an NFT project. That became very cumbersome because people just kept assuming that we were trying to sell them an NFT collection because that was the narrative that, took off obviously in 2021. But besides that, it got a lot more smooth.
Yeah, there's certain narratives in every trend, and you kind of have to adapt each pitch to kind of go with the narrative. So I would imagine that in 2018, when you were first pitching, it was very much a lot of just the basics of what is blockchain, and then evolving that over time makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you've evolved the product over time. You mentioned beforehand, you mentioned giving up fan control, right? Or like allowing fans to have some control. I guess as far as I understand the product, fan tokens are at the heart of the Chili's model. What does it actually unlock for fans? What does it actually allow for people to do? What's the utility?
Yeah, good question. Interesting way to put it, to say that they're at the heart of the Chili's model, especially now that Chili's is permissionless because they're the core asset class that makes the blockchain that we built relevant, right? Because you can't say you run a sports blockchain without at least having sports based assets on it. But the tokens themselves, we try to bifurcate away from being at least instinctively connected as like, well, that's the only reason for being for the chain. But kind of sorry with that out of the way. The thing that makes the tokens useful, ironically, well, at least in my opinion, and I think this will change, and it's not necessarily just the fact that they're on the blockchain. I think the fact that their tokens makes them extremely composable, which ironically I think is an issue that a lot of NFT collections had, for example, right? Because then their pitch was, if someone's pitch is we're going to make NFTs and that it's a membership experience, it's not very flexible, right? You can't just magically turn it into something else. Whereas fan tokens are generic. So what mattered to us is just that we had a contractual relationship with the teams. We had rewards asset, tickets, access to the teams, and we had a token we could tie that to. And that was always the core of, let's say, the value and reason for being of the fan tokens because there was a very simple promise. You buy these tokens. Essentially, you don't, right? You don't sell them. That proves your loyalty to the team. And in return, you get to vote on team decisions. That doesn't happen magically. Teams don't just, see a community project and say, okay, like tell us what to do. Like tell us to change our branding. We'll change our crest, et cetera. We'll change our, goal scoring music in our stadium. But we thought they did do that. They were obligated to do that because they were the partners in this token. They have a revenue share agreement in perpetuity on all token sales and resales. We built the platform that they and us could use together to actually disseminate votes and have options that people could vote on. And that's what makes the token valuable. I think not to, keep saying we're naive, but if you're going to build a utility asset, like you kind of have to focus on the utility. All the crypto aspects of it are important as well. And you have to be flexible enough to know that if like one mode of utility, which we learned, doesn't work, you switch it up into whether it's different vote contents or different ways for people to get rewards points to get the tickets and the recognition from the team. That doesn't matter so long as you're actually actively doing it, right? You can't just say you do it and then at the end it's just an asset with an IP tied to it and nothing else. The stuff that matters, the stuff that gives most things in crypto their value. I think outside of financial products, ironically, has nothing to do with crypto. It's just all business relationships, contracts, and execution. Instead of using your money to buy yachts, you use the money to build business infrastructure. So you have a CS team and you actually have a working tool and product and you reinvest it back into it.
Gotcha. I guess my next question is going to be a little bit more bringing back to the basics. I'm listening to you and I understand because I work in crypto. I understand what you mean when you're talking about the NFTs and like the differentiations and the composability of a token and the utility of a token. Can we bring it a little bit back to the basics just for people who are maybe in a different field, like somebody's taken a special interest in DeFi, so and they understand that field very much. But in your specific interests, this is kind of how you bring them on board is you explain to them really easily, what does Chiliz do? So I guess my question is, you partner with some of the biggest names in sports, right? So you partner with them. How does that partnership typically work? What's in it for the user? What's in it for the partners? And what's in it for you as a company as well? So how does that partnership operate, and how do people understand what is it that you guys do?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from the perspective of the partner, it's, I suppose, pretty simple. It's a twofold, right? Because partners look for revenue. They need to make money. They're a business like anything else that has costs. And they're looking for ways to either, I mean, in many cases, adopt new technology in the hopes that that gives them an advantage in terms of getting new fans, re-engaging old fans, upping the engagement levels of their existing fans. And for us, the partners are important and minting the assets are obviously important because we, at the end of the day, it's funny that you brought up DeFi because we want to build, a sports sentiment marketplace. Kind of going back to what I said about tokens being important because there's composability. All the utility stuff is cool and the value points to the people that buy the tokens aren't simple, right? Some people may want to buy 10 tokens just because they want to vote. They think it's cool. Some may buy them just because they want to stake them because they want to participate in this gamified yield where, instead of just pure money in exchange for staking, you're getting access to money can't buy experiences or tickets or merchandise or what have you, anything we have listed on our shop. But a lot of people also want to have the gamified experience of interacting with these tokens in almost, I would say, like a DeFi sense, right? They want to do eventually competing staking programs. They want to figure out ways to use sports branded assets to participate in prediction markets, which itself is just gamified DeFi in large sense. And that's, I mean, I would say wholesale. If you look at all that together, that's what we're going for. And those are the value points for everyone.
Gotcha. I really like that gamified DeFi. It's a good way to put it. It's easy, it's simple, it's understandable to people who've both been in crypto for a long time and also to those coming in for the first time. All right, next question, I guess. Let's say that you've got a traditional sports team and they know nothing about what you do. They don't really understand blockchain tech, etc. What's been the feedback for those getting into Web3 gamification for the first time? What's it like dipping their toes into it? Maybe they have a lot of recurring questions. What's it been like educating new people, maybe more from the enterprise
Oh,
level?
sure. I think there's a universal answer to this. It's not just sports organizations. I think just mainstream business organizations as a whole. Everyone's first questions aren't about the tech or the opportunity. It's probably, I'd say, fear and uncertainty of like, who are you? Is this legal? What are you pitching me? How does this work? Is this a financial product? Are you going to sell me something that's going to get me in trouble with the regulator and the country where my business is? And honestly, if that's not the first questions they ask, I'd be kind of worried at this point because, crypto at large hasn't had the best track record of attaching itself to mainstream anything, really. And obviously it's much evolved now than it was 4 years ago, especially in the US, especially in Europe, where, MiCA regulation finally has swept over the region. More places, even like in Japan, which were they have very stringent regulation, but it's actually been set for a while, so you kind of know the rules of the game in a sense. But that's what people want to know first. There's not, I would say, there's been almost an erosion of inherent trust, which I think is good for the industry. Where 5 years ago, anyone who pitched anything to whether it's a sports team or another business, if they had even the short-term money to back it up, like, hey, we'll pay you the X million dollars for the sponsorship, people just took it, not realizing the risks. And I think now people do a lot more due diligence. They understand who the, let's say, white hat players in the space are, and they're really, really interested. I think before taking your idea seriously of, hey, let's get through the weeds of like, is this reasonable and even realistic for us to do with you? And then once it is, okay, let's circle back and is the idea good? How is, and it's kind of the stuff I said from the last question you asked, right? Then people all have the same questions in terms of how am I going to get more fans, more engaged fans, reach out to new demographics that I haven't reached out yet. That's actually a big one too. I think a lot of brands are very interested in crypto predominantly because it skews young. And a lot of brands see themselves, especially in sports, depending on the type of sport. The sport is perceived as slower or more boring, or games run 6 hours. Their demographics tend to age year over year because they're having a hard time getting, the TikTok generation of fans to pay attention to something so slow. And the idea of crypto is alluring to them because they think, okay, well, this is something that younger people are interested in now and they see in a serious way, not gimmicky way, but as uh, a
Serious.
serious thing for them and yeah, them in their future and their, their financial future and whatnot. And then they get interested in all those things. How are we going to reach them? How are we going to make money off them? How is this going to make our brand better? How do we get more data on our users? Which isn't obviously always the case or possible in crypto, ironically, but yeah, and they take it from there. But I think it's very circular where people now they'll take a 2 minute pitch of your idea and then they'll kind of say, okay, that's great. That all sounds amazing. Now let's back up and walk me through all the regulatory rigor and issues you have. Like, is this even legal where you're pitching it? Is it not? Who are you as a company? What have you done in the past? And then once, all those green flags get checked off, then you go back into the pitch.
Yeah, coming back to what we were saying earlier, different markets, different trends, different ways of pitching, but it's also interesting in that on the receiving end, it's a very different approach where if you're not if the first question isn't fear now, I understand what you mean, where it's like you're supposed to be asking the good questions now. You're supposed to be worried about the
Right.
regulatory side of things as priority. So it's refreshing and reassuring that not only is it just, oh, okay, lots of hype, let's move forward quickly, but we're actually solidifying ourselves as a serious industry. And over time, it's also reflected in the kind of customers and clients that we have, that it's all serious questions first. Where's the audits? Where's the proof? Where's the instead of the just trust, it's now very much leaning heavy into the verify. So that's
Yeah.
reassuring to hear. But going beyond just gaming industry, I know you come in from poker itself, and then you're sort of touching upon sports companies. Is there any interest in going beyond this into maybe film IP, into gaming, into music, any other kind of creative media assets?
Yeah, sure. Always. Well, I think we still use the old slogan we had is like the blockchain for sports and entertainment. Partially because that is where we wanted to go, and partially because we just wanted to make sure we didn't pigeonhole ourselves into just sports when there is a much broader universe of, spectator based entertainment out there. I think at the end of the day, there's really not much difference in the fan dynamics of a good Broadway play or a concert or a music festival or a film running in theaters and sports. It's still, whether it's, digitally or physically, you still get a group of people who love a thing, whether it's a sports team or a piece of entertainment, franchise content, and they're ready to give attention and money to that thing in exchange for having their needs met, right? The needs are different, et cetera, but the structure is basically the same. So we figured, well, if it works in sports, why wouldn't it work? Why wouldn't it work in music and film? Obviously in a different kind of mode and structure, but we kind of humbled ourselves because we did, especially again in 21 and 22 when everyone was growing exponentially, you kind of get a little too big for your britches and start thinking like, okay, let's do everything all at once, right? Let's really, really take over. It looks like this is all happening. It's happening right now. And we could quickly realize that like, well, if we wanted to successfully transition into music as well. Like we can't just magically do it. Like we'd have to basically build a second company. And we also had no idea how the music industry worked and what was possible and what wasn't possible. All the research and kind of networking into music that I even did showed me like, oh, I have no idea. Like this is a scary and sharky industry and I have no idea how even all these contracts work. Like half of the ideas you would pitch to people, they would shut you up and say, well, that doesn't work because actually, like, this guy doesn't own the rights to this. They're owned by this guy, and you would never get, be able to sell tickets or do this at this venue because it's owned by these companies and so on and so on. So I think we still have that ambition, but it's more so I think we're ready to find and support people who would do that, people that would build, the socios for music, for example, or the socios for film. And I think they're actually going to film. I think there is a bunch of industries where the thing that people really want is so much more ownership based and less flexible than in sports, where fandom is enough that actually our idea works, but I think it only works in a securitized way, right? Because at the end of the day, people want to support film, but they don't want to buy a fan token. Like they don't want to buy a Quentin Tarantino fan token and then just get random pointless merchandise for his films. They'd want to be in a position saying like, well, I have, $500, $1,000. Can I invest this in, his next three films? I think he's only making one, so it's a bad idea, bad example. Can I invest it in that film and be like, kind of like a retail producer of the film? And I think 5 years ago, people tried to do that and they couldn't figure out how. And a lot of people actually got in trouble because they were so insistent on the fact that like, well, you can do this, but it's still not a security. And I think we've all grown. And now there is actually a lot of companies you can see it. I know, our friends at Republic, they do it with film specifically, right? I'll give the concrete example. They did, an Eli Roth project where he created a production house and had a slate of, I think, 7 films. And people can go on the platform and, buy, I think they were NFTs, buy NFT ownership and become part of a community, but for that film production company instead of a sports team. And so I think it works. I don't think necessarily it's for us to build. I think we would love it on our chain, but like we're not broker dealers at the end of the day. And I know next to nothing about, producing television, maybe television a bit. It's not a story for now, but definitely not music. So you have to find the subject matter experts and support them to build it.
Well, there's many different nuances that you don't really understand unless you're actually part of the industry. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
interesting. I didn't know that about music. Like you understand theoretically that, well, for example, Britney Spears doesn't actually own her own music, and when you first start like diving into it, it's maybe not clear like who actually can we go to talk about this. But it's interesting that you are considering other areas, but maybe something that has a very clear IP, like who owns this, who can we come to, and yeah, it would take relative time and not bite off too much that you can chew. But I guess I've got two follow-up questions. We're going to start wrapping up and then we've got some rapid fire questions, but I've got two follow-up questions. One is to do a little bit with us because well, I'm from a company called Tangem like I mentioned before, but Chiliz is actually integrated into Tangem. So part of the question is what makes it a good partnership and what generally makes a good crypto partnership, which would be like the follow-up question, which is how did you come across Tangem and what do you really enjoy about the partnership? How to build a good crypto partnership and make sure that you're succeeding in the right areas.
I mean, I think that one's pretty straightforward, right? Well, you did do already. I think an introduction and tangent, so I won't explain what you guys do. You obviously know it, and I'm pretty sure your audience knows it. But for the last 2 years, we've been an open, permissionless chain, and it's pretty important to have good, secure, feature-rich wallet and self-custody solutions on any chain. And especially for us, we started as a completely centralized business, partially because we were scared and partially because that's back at the time, that's what regulators wanted. They didn't like the Wild West of self-custody. So it's been a journey for us when we started with Socios to say, okay, first we're going to open up our chain, which I think inherently means we need to have a lot of very reputable, wallet and custody partners that we can work with because we're not going to be the only solution to house our tokens anymore. Back then it was just Socios or an exchange, and there's literally, a one-way street between the two, and that's it. So when we opened up our chain, the first order of business, I would say, in terms of starting to build out infrastructure on top of it was finding wallet partners. And I think if you look at it in the future, what's interesting or maybe symbiotic to me is we now, I think, are much less precious about making sure the fan tokens are housed in Socios to the point where we much more so look at Socios as a non-custodial wallet in its own right, just because it's obviously already where our core community is. But then looking at all the utility aspects of Socios as adapt, meaning like the voting features specifically and fan token staking features, and then the user journey of, staking for points and then using those points to get tickets. It seemed logical to us that like, well, we don't need to monopolize the wallet space for access to that, right? At the end of the day, people can have their fan tokens wherever they want to hold them, including solutions, for example, from you guys, and still have access to the utility business because the best means of distribution for us is to make fan tokens as easily accessible as they are. And if that means that people decide that they want to hold all their fan tokens for teams on Tangem as opposed to Socios, because I think rightly so, you guys are the trusted custody partner compared to us. It's on their core business in a sense. that doesn't mean that they should be penalized, and Tangem shouldn't become, the portal into the kind of utility universe that we end up building, or with any third-party partners that also accept fan tokens. So in that way, I think it's really positive.
Just anything to make sure that people are keeping in mind that safety, utility, security all needs to be top priority.
Yeah,
So I full-heartedly agree. Let's not limit people just because they're keeping the token somewhere else. We're just there to make sure that people are making the proper choices and keeping as much as they possibly can off exchanges at all times. It's just the better way forward. We've all been in the industry for a while. We know how it works, but there's space for both. But long-term storage is definitely something that Tantrum prioritizes deeply. All right. And then the final question for today, before we dive into the rapid fire questions, up on the roadmap, what's really top priority for you to translate to the viewers and the listeners of today?
yeah, fair. I'll answer that one first for Chiliz, and I think second for fan tokens. For Chiliz as a protocol, I think over the next 12 months you'll see us dive a lot more in terms of our focus, building and supporting the DeFi infrastructure and experience for fan tokens. I think that's one place where we've really lacked. We've seen from our community that they say, listen, we love these assets because they're flexible. We love staking them for the sports stuff, but like they're still assets at the end of the day. So we should be able to kind of what I said earlier about gamified DeFi. Like, can you make up either a fun lending experience or just a real lending experience for these tokens so we can kind of get the full value out of the fact that they're composable crypto assets like anything else, as well as kind of the utility outlet of the token. So focusing on things like that, focusing on liquid staking for other people just to have it as a feature that they can build on top of, focusing on integrating and supporting prediction markets that are able to utilize fan tokens. Hopefully in the future, looking at evolving and upgrading on a technical level, the assets on our chain themselves, right? So that are fully divisible, that they're kind of one for one compatible with the tools that already exist in the EVM DeFi space. And then more so on the, let's say, business front for fan tokens entering the US again. We tried in 2021 and 22. We were essentially foiled through no fault of our own, because during the FTX collapse, it became, as we touched on earlier, a toxic subject for regulators and for businesses, more importantly, in the US. So people went from being within an inch of letting us launch fan tokens, the NBA, the NFL, to essentially, within 24 hours of FTX's collapse, saying, listen, we love you guys. This is a great business model. Call us back whenever something major happens because we're just not touching this. You know, call us back in 5 years, call us back in 10 years. That obviously had a very quick turnaround when the new administration in the US took power. They obviously, as we all saw, that went very, whether it's too aggressively or not, but went very pro crypto very fast to the point where it became an option for us to speak with the SEC and other regulators and to speak with, other parts of government, actually find support and find clarity and figure out, listen, what do you guys think? What are our rule sets? What do you want our best practices to be? So that we can then go back to those same teams and leagues in the US and say, okay, I think we're ready to do business in a way where you feel comfortable. And we're focusing a lot as well on markets like Brazil and Japan, where we're starting to see a lot more traction for, I would say, not just, fan tokens as an asset class and interest from users, but also in developers seeing how they can leverage our, kind of silly niche industry blockchain for sport to build on top of, knowing that if they build on top of Chili's, that kind of have this network effect from a business perspective and a community perspective, where if they want to build something utility driven towards sports or, as we said earlier, for entertainment, they're not starting from zero. They're building out a protocol whose core, dev team also cares about the same thing, almost to the exclusion of wanting to build a generalistic chain, like the big guys like Solana and Polygon and so forth. Base.
Well, there's always a knock-on effect whenever anything good or bad happens, but it's our job to adopt and make sure that you're keeping an eye out on all of the changes that are
Yeah.
happening. But I'm glad that we had this conversation. This is exactly how we start making sure that people are aware of both the product and also the backside of it in terms of understanding how does new tech evolve? How does it create? How do we actually build upon the new tools that we have? So with crypto, it's not just the same old, but now we're evolving past, going from gaming cards, like trading cards to, well, now you have tokens for fans. And that's just the way of the market. Evolution is the way forward. All right. I think what we should be doing right now is doing just a really short couple of rapid fire questions. The best way that I can clue you in on this is just to do one sentence or one word, or even better, answers. We're going to be using them for little short form snippets all across the internet. Just
Sure.
thinking cap on and make sure that you're aware that this is going to be really, really fast. All right. Short and snappy. First question, one word to describe the Chili's community.
Fanatical.
If you could give any athlete their own token, what would it be?
No tokens ever.
Favorite sporting event that you've attended, maybe based on the fact that you're affiliated with Chili's?
Super Bowl 2022 LA. Peak crypto hype.
Peak, peak. All right. Web3 buzzwords that you secretly love or hate.
I hate, I would say, every single one of them.
All right. First crypto that you ever bought. Are you a Bitcoin maxi or did you start off somewhere else?
Bitcoin. Yeah, of course.
All right. So this is probably a little bit more of a personal hack. What's your productivity hack that you always can call upon?
I would say deep anxiety and personal shame. That really helps people get pretty productive pretty quick.
All right. Final question. If you had to build for the masses or build for the diehards, where would you lean?
I would just lean on what the best idea is. And I kind of wouldn't care on if the masses or the diehards were the ones that took it up, to be honest.
All right. Then I'm going to be cheeky and ask, how do you differentiate between a good idea?
You don't. So what's making you happy? I think is probably the best way to tell.
So just build what will make you happy?
I think in a perfect world, yeah.
Let's build that perfect world then, in which case. Right.
As a surrogate, build what makes you money.
Also, a very good way to put it. Build what makes you happy, build what makes you money. All right, Max, I've loved talking to you. So is there anything that people can keep in mind where to go to get more involved, maybe some sort of Discord page or something that you want us to point attention to what's happening really, really soon? Get the last word with
Sure.
you.
Well, I'll keep it quick. Like you said, to the Tangem community, please go buy fan tokens on whether it's on Cayenne or on exchanges. I don't really care. Just buy them and then put them on the Tangem wallet because you can eventually use the Tangem wallet to interact with the entire ecosystem. And other than that, I just, I don't want to sound cliche, but follow me on X, follow our channels on X because like any other crypto company worth its salt, that's mostly where you're going to find the most up-to-date information. You follow Alex on X as well because nobody has oversight over his account. So that's his unfiltered viewpoints.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I do agree that X is probably the best place to go. It's not in any way cliched. I believe that it's a better landing page nowadays. If you cannot go to a page and immediately get the point of what is your product about, then you're not going to convert anywhere else. So start with X and then move to everything else. But that's it in terms of my ramblings for now. Max, anything else that you want to say, or is this goodbye for us?
No, I think this is goodbye. Anna, thank you for having me on.
Likewise, thank you for being here with us. And for all of our listeners, be sure to subscribe and tune in to the next episode of So Tell Us About Yourself, which is the wonderful podcast from a Tangem team. And Max, thank you again for talking to people about how to build products of the future. Thanks again, and talk soon.